The debugger in your mind, how positivity fixes more than code. A quietly powerful career accelerator hides in plain sight the story you tell yourself every morning before you open your laptop. Choose an optimistic plotline and you'll bounce back faster from bugs and budget cuts, magnetize people who want to work with you, and end up steering the projects everyone else wishes they'd been picked for. This article unpacks how that works, why it isn't wishy-washy good vibes, only fluff, and most importantly, how to make a positive mindset your default setting even when Slack feels like a war zone. Introduction. It was 8:57 a.m. and the sprint review was already on fire. The database migration had detonated overnight, taking half the platform with it, and the faces on Zoom looked like a grid of melted candles. As I watched the clock tick toward 9 o'clock, I realized something odd. My heart wasn't racing. My first thought wasn't, oh no, career-ending disaster. It was, well, this is going to make a great post-mortem lesson. The difference between those two inner monologues is invisible from the outside, but it decides almost everything that happens next, from how creatively you debug to whether your teammates will follow your lead or quietly mute you. We like to pretend tech problems are purely logical, yet the stories echoing in our skulls shape what we notice, which shapes what we act on, which shapes the reality we eventually ship. Get those stories wrong, and even routine code reviews feel like gladiator combat. Get them right, and you become the calm eye of every storm. That's not motivational poster philosophy, it's basic cause and effect, and you can wire it up like any other feedback loop in software. So let's walk through the circuit diagram of workplace optimism. Well, trace how a single optimistic assumption my colleague did answer because she's swamped, not because she hates me, cascades into better solutions, stronger relationships, and a career trajectory that looks suspiciously like an exponential curve. Along the way, well-meet feedback loops, emotional contagion, and a kind of resilience that lets you treat a failed promotion like a plot twist, not a dead end. Ready? Grab your coffee. We're diving in. The lens you choose. Why perspective changes reality. Picture two engineers staring at the same Jira ticket. The first sees an impossible legacy tangle, memories of midnight pages, and a manager who obviously assigned the task as punishment. The second sees an archaeological dig site, fragile relics, yes, but also priceless context and a chance to untangle a knot that's throttled the whole org for years. Their keyboards clatter at identical speeds, yet the second engineer's brain is running a different operating system. Psychologists call this interpretive bias, the tendency to tilt ambiguous events toward hope or toward catastrophe. In code terms, your brain is a compiler that must choose default values for every uninitialized variable. An unanswered email can default to "im being ghosted" or their heads down prepping something awesome. Because your behavior flows from those defaults, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. If you assume ghosting, you follow up with a defensive ping. Tension spikes and the collaboration really does sour. Assume the best, and your polite nudge lands on a teammate relieved you didn't jump to conclusions. Perspective also controls what your cognitive spotlight illuminates. Positivity isn't denial. It's selective attention to facts that produce action. The whitewater kayaker doesn't stare at the rock she's avoiding. She fixes her gaze on the gap between rocks, because where the eyes go, the paddle follows. At work, eyes trained on opportunities start spotting them everywhere: a stale repo begging for refactor, a junior dev's pull request, that only needs a little nudge to sparkle, that snowballs into visible impact, which feeds confidence, which widens the lens further. None of this requires rose-tinted delusion. Bad code bases exist, layoffs happen, production fires burn. The trick is to treat those facts as neutral inputs, not omens. A thermostat doesn't panic when the room is cold, it just flips the heater on. Your mindset can do the same, but only if you wire the sensor to optimism, not paranoia. Building the upward spiral. How positive feedback loops work. Software engineers adore loops while for event feedback. A mindset is simply a loop that runs in wetware. Harass the pseudocode while working, assume generous intent, act collaboratively, observe supportive response, reinforce positive belief. Start with a generous assumption, my reviewer wants to help, not humiliate. That flicks behavior into a collaborative key. You ask clarifying questions instead of bristling. The reviewer responds with extra context and maybe a thumbs up emoji. Your brain records see, people are supportive, reinforcing the initial attitude. Next time, the loop spins faster. Negative loops mirror this, but with darker fuel. Assume malice, act defensive, provoke curt replies, cement the belief that folks are out to get me. Both spirals obey the same mathematics, only the sign differs. The real-world consequences diverge wildly, like two commits branching away after a fork. One evolves into maintainable success, the other into merge conflict purgatory. You can hack the loop by injecting new inputs. Think of it as seeding a random number generator. Force one optimistic interpretation, just one, and watch how quickly the output metrics shift, fewer size, swifter answers, the sudden appearance of allies. These are not placebo effects, they're behavioral chain reactions, observable in code velocity, incident stats, and even cardiology reports on stress hormones. Engineers often scoff, "I'll believe it when I see the data." Fair. But check your retrospectives teams with a culture of blameless post-mortems close tickets faster than teams that witch hunt. The same bugs, the same tools, different mindset loops. Data delivered. Hail forward, resilience, grit, and a cushion of optimism. The year I missed 2 promotions in a row felt like tumbling down a mineshaft. Every fortnight brought fresh feedback that started with "we really value you" and ended with "not quite staff yet." Without optimism, those meetings would have tattooed "not enough" on my frontal lobe. Instead, I treated each as a code profiler trace. Where were the hotspots? Which call stacks or cycles? Optimism doesn't delete pain, it repurposes it. A resilient mind reframes rejection as latency, not fatal error. Not this cycle translates to "okay, the loop needs another iteration." That mindset kept me experimenting, pairing with cross-functional teams, volunteering for hairy migrations, documenting lessons learned like breadcrumbs for future travelers. 12 months later, when the org re-evaluated, my packet of small, consistent wins outweighed the shinier but brittle success stories of flashier colleagues. The psychology matches the anecdote. Studies on explanatory style, how people explain failure to themselves, show optimists use temporary, specific language. This feature bombed today because of one flawed assumption, while pessimists go global and permanent. I always mess up. Temporary explanations invite fixes, permanent ones paralyze. That's engineering 101. Scope the bug to the smallest failing unit test, not the whole code base. There's also a biochemical payoff. Positive emotions widen your brain's attentional field and increase dopamine, the neurotransmitter of learning. You literally learn from failure faster when you're in a good mood. Resilience, then, isn't a Spartan ability to ignore slings and arrows. It's an optimistic lens that turns arrows into direction vectors. The emotional Wi-Fi network, spreading positivity through teams. Emotions hop hosts like packets on Wi-Fi. You join a meeting and sense tension before a word is spoken, shoulders hunched, cameras off, keyboards clacking in passive-aggressive Morse code. That contagion cuts both ways. Positivity radiates too, and unlike network latency, it scales elegantly. One upbeat engineer can reboot a whole room's emotional firmware. Mirror neurons help explain why. Our brains run silent background processes that sync facial expressions and tone with whoever's nearby. A calm voice lowers collective cortisol. A snarky sigh does the opposite. Leaders exploit this hardwired empathy API whether they know it or not. If the tech lead treats obstacles as solvable puzzles, the team subconsciously tags the sprint backlog as interesting rather than soul-sucking. This matters most in conflict. Debates about architecture often derail into ego jousts. A positive mindset reframes the goal: we're both debugging the same system, not debating our personal worth. Say that aloud and watch shoulders drop. Suddenly my idea and your idea merge into our best currently known hypothesis, ready for A/B testing. Culture scholars call this psychological safety, but you don't need jargon. Just remember how it felt in school when a teacher welcomed wrong answers because they revealed thinking. Recreate that vibe in design reviews and you'll see juniors speak up, seniors listen, and the codebase improve in ways no linter can enforce. Gravity-defying careers. Why optimistic engineers get the moonshot projects. Ever notice how the most interesting gigs land on certain desks again and again? It isn't always raw skill. Managers allocate risk like venture capitalists. When stakes soar, new product, tight deadline, they look for people who solve problems without igniting drama. Optimists fit the bill. They surface issues early, frame them constructively, and rally troops instead of starting turf wars. I once inherited a greenfield rewrite that had chewed through 2 previous leads. The director confided, "We picked you because you keep the temperature down." Translation: my positivity was cheaper than a fire extinguisher. That project, delivered on time, became the bullet point that finally nudged me to staff. Not because the code was perfect, it wasn't, but because the team stayed functional enough to iterate post-launch. Opportunity is a network graph, nodes are projects, edges are relationships. Optimism thickens edges. When people like working with you, your name surfaces in hallway conversations. We need someone steady on the cross-cloud migration. What about them? Soon you're triangulating complex scopes ordinary resumes never touch. The resume catches up later, but the reputation leads. Sponsorship follows the same physics. Senior leaders champion optimistic engineers because they represent positive expected value. Hand them ambiguity and they return order. Hand them failure and they mine it for insights. That reliability compounds like interest. Years later, outsiders call it luck. Training the inner coach. Practical ways to strengthen your positive muscle mindset isn't a factory-set BIOS. It's firmware you can flash. The process resembles TDD for the soul red-green refactor day after day. Here are 3 training protocols that moved my optimism needle from skeptical to default. First, the interpretation pause. When something ambiguous happens, late feedback, terse message, impose a 5-second delay before reacting. During that pause, generate the most generous, plausible explanation. You're not forced to believe it, just consider it. Over time, the brain starts caching those generous branches, making them faster to access than gloomier ones. Second, the small win ledger. At day's end, jot down a tiny victory paired patiently with a new hire, shaved 10 mingers off a query, resisted an eye roll in sprint planning. This trains the spotlight on progress, and like any lens, it magnifies what it focuses on. Months later, the notebook reads like a montage of competence, a far better antidote to imposter syndrome than LinkedIn likes. Third, the language linter. Pessimistic phrases I always, they never, it's hopeless are code smells. Rewrite them in real time. I often forget this API scope reduced, we haven't yet found a fixed time box added. It feels awkward, like renaming variables mid-demo, but clarity emerges. Specific language narrows problems to human-sized chunks your brain can attack. None of these rituals require chanting affirmations in the mirror. They are cognitive refactors, as mundane and mechanical as cleaning imports. Stick with them, and optimism becomes the default branch you merge into without thinking. Conclusion: a positive mindset at work isn't about pretending fires don't burn. It's about strapping on the right gear so you can walk through them without turning to ash. Choose optimistic interpretations, and you bootstrap a feedback loop that breeds resilience, attracts collaborators, and unlocks opportunities your resume alone could never justify. Remember that sprint review inferno I mentioned? We shipped the fix in 48 hours, but the bigger win was invisible, a team that emerged from the flames believing in itself. That belief has carried us through every release since. So the next time your brain reaches for the worst case story, pause, draft a better one, run the loop, because in tech as in life, what you build between your ears shapes everything you build with your hands, and that small rewiring may be the most sophisticated engineering you'll ever do.